Let's see. So welcome to class today. We'll discuss the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen by Olympe de Gouges. Let's get started with a prayer. Christina, would you offer that prayer for us?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're very thankful for the gospel of Jesus Christ and the truths that it gives us. And we're also thankful for the opportunity to study history through American Heritage School and help us to feel Thy Spirit, teach us truth as we read documents that have truth mixed with philosophies of men, that we may understand the people that we are reading, but that we can also understand the truths that Thou hast taught us. Help the teacher to be able to be led by Thee to teach us. This we say in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Christina. Welcome, Heidi. How are you today, Heidi? Can you hear me, Heidi?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, I just had myself muted.
Okay, no, that's fine. I was getting worried that we weren't going to work again today, so I'm glad.
No.
Okay, well, great. Well, so far it's just the three of us. Hopefully we'll have a few more join us soon. Well, let's get started. We have a really interesting document to discuss today, the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen. Okay, there we go. And so, of course, you remember, the last thing we were talking about was this document of secular natural law, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen from 1789, which most people would point to as one of the major results of the French Revolution, this document that's continued down to this day, and it's been very influential, as we pointed out. Well, there were two major groups left out in France, slaves and women, and so today we're going to talk mostly about the women, but first I thought we'd just take a little peek at what was going on with slavery. Okay, so what about slaves? Interestingly enough, in 1794, the National Assembly in France abolished slavery and the slave trade. And this was the same republic called the First Republic that would also institute the Terror. And so they're very, very radical on lots of fronts. One of them, of course, I think we would say is very good, abolishing slavery. The other, of course, would have disastrous circumstances brought upon France with all of the deaths by guillotine. Interestingly enough, when Napoleon took power, he reinstituted slavery in 1802. And then, by 1848, the Second Republic, as it was termed, definitively ended slavery in France and its colonies. If we compare slavery then and the abolishment of it in France to what was going on in Britain and the United States regarding the same issue, I think it's pretty interesting as well. 1807, the slave trade was abolished in Britain, as opposed to 1808, where the slave trade was abolished in the United States. And then 1834, slavery was abolished in the British Empire. In almost all of its areas, there were some that were very, very far out in terms of different territories that it had that took a little bit longer, but 1834, almost all of them. And then 1865, as we know, with the American Civil War in the United States, slavery was abolished. So there's just a little bit of comparison for you. It's also interesting to note that during his presidential campaign of 1844, shortly before his death, his martyrdom, Joseph Smith, the prophet, called for the abolition of slavery. Who would like to read this quote from his views on the power and policy of the government of the United States, which was his presidential platform that was presented on his behalf?
I can read it.
Oh, thanks so much.
My cogitations, like Daniel's, have for a long time troubled me when I view the condition of men throughout the world, and more especially in this boasted realm where the Declaration of Independence holds these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, but at the same time some 2 or 3 millions of people are held as slaves for life because the spirit in them is covered with a darker skin than ours.
And then one more part of that. And Heidi, would you like to read this half of the quote?
Sure. The wisdom which ought to characterize the freest, wisest, and most noble nation of the 19th century should, like the sun in his meridian splendor, warm every object beneath its rays, and ameliorate the condition of all, black or white, bond or free. For the best of books says, God hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth.
Great. Thanks so much. And then as an explanation of how Joseph Smith wanted to actually do this, if he were elected president, Dr. Arnie Garr, in the February 2009 Ensign, wrote an article on his presidential campaign, and he said the following. Walter, would you read this quote for us?
Sure. Eliminating slavery was another important part of his platform. Instead of simply calling for the abolition of slavery, Joseph Smith's platform would have Congress pay every man a reasonable price for slaves out of the surplus revenue arising from the sale of public lands and from the deduction of pay for members of Congress.
Thanks so much for that, and certainly an interesting solution. Okay, well, let's talk about women then, because that's, of course, the focus of our course today. 1791, the document that you read, Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen, was written by Olympe de Gouges, and it was a polemical pamphlet, one that would argue against common notions, one that was meant to address certain points and try to refute them, certainly an argumentative pamphlet, as I'm sure you've seen as you've read it. And just out of curiosity, were all three of you able to at least read a little bit of it today?
Yeah, I read a little bit of it the other day
Yeah.
when we read when I read The Rights of Man. I skimmed through it then, but I haven't had a chance to go back through it and look at it really well. So.
Okay, but you have it. You're at least a little familiar with it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I have lots of quotes actually from it that we can all look at today too, so you'll be in great shape. It's interesting when you look at the context of this document. Basically the circumstances in which it was written. Because at the time it was written, the French leaders, including leaders of the Revolution, believed very, very firmly in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's notion of separate spheres, which simply stated is that the home is the sphere for a woman, this private sphere, and then the public sphere or work outside the home is the sphere for a man. And because they believed strongly in it, they as we can see, there were certain things they didn't give to women as a result of the Revolution, even though those rights were extended for men. For example, the First Republic didn't give women the right to vote or greater opportunities for education. At the same time, though, it's interesting to note that they did make family law egalitarian and gender blind. For example, if you have 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, then they would all share in inheritance rather than the son getting it all. And then also, it's interesting to note that they provided a generous welfare provision for war widows, for the aged, and also for unmarried mothers to try to protect them. And then they also created divorce laws that provided abused or abandoned wives with some benefits, whereas before that time they were really just left to their own devices without any means to support themselves. And so it's interesting to see what the French Revolution did do for women. And then if we go on just a little bit, things change because when Napoleon comes, and for all intents and purposes, you could either say ends the revolution or continues it in a very, very different way than the radical left wanted it to continue. Because remember, Napoleon did say, "I am the revolution," and also the revolution is finished. But in his civil code, which we'll study next week, Napoleon discontinued most of the revolution's gains for women, citing, quote, the weakness of women's brains. That's his opinion. It is interesting to note, though, that the Roman Catholic Church at this time provided the most non-traditional opportunities for women. For example, women were educated by the church. They could go to schools. They could pick up lots of skills and knowledge that they wouldn't be able to pick up elsewhere. Also, they could be part of service organizations with a very wide outreach, so they could certainly be out in the public much more than in the private sphere of home. And then also, they could pick up personal vocations as part of the church as nuns. And so it's interesting to note that between 1815 and 1870, the number of nuns in France rose tenfold, times 10. And even with all this going on, it would take France 154 more years to grant universal suffrage to women. And so think of it, at the very, very end of World War II, women in France could finally vote. 1945. By comparison, the United States granted universal suffrage to women in 1920, and then Britain followed suit in 1928. So just a little bit more comparative history there for you. And welcome to Caden and Wendy. How are you doing today?
Can you hear me?
Is that Wendy?
Yeah. Sorry. I was having some difficulties, and I just barely heard you a few seconds ago.
Oh no, I'm very sorry about the technology.
Okay, we're good.
Yeah, and to catch you up briefly, and also hello, Caden. How are you? Caden, if you're here, you can unmute yourself to talk. Hello, Caden. Well, maybe he'll join us in a moment. And yeah, anyway, briefly, Wendy, we were just looking at the fact that the revolution gave some gains to women. For example, if we go back here, there we go. The revolution made family law egalitarian and gender blind, so things like inheritance. They provided welfare provisions for war widows, the aged, and unmarried mothers. They created divorce laws that provided abused or abandoned wives with benefits, even though the revolution didn't give the vote or greater opportunities for education to women. The civil code that Napoleon started took away most of the gains for women, citing the weakness of women's brains, in his words. And then the church became
Testing.
a resource for many women.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Oh,
I'm sorry?
It's working now.
Oh, hi,
Good.
Caden.
It wasn't, though, earlier.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The plug wasn't plugged in all the way. But now.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. But you're with us now.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we're happy to have you.
Yeah.
Well, and so the church did provide some non-traditional opportunities for women in this age. And the interesting thing to note is that it would take France until 1945 to grant universal suffrage to women, whereas if you look at the United States, 1920, and then Great Britain, 1928. Okay, so sort of here's the background information for de Gouges, and here's a picture of Olympe, 1748 to 93. What's interesting about the date that she died?
I don't know.
If you think of the history of the French Revolution, what was going on in I'm sorry, go ahead.
Was she beheaded?
She was beheaded, yes.
Oh,
She was beheaded as part of the terror for speaking out against the First Republic. And so no, she was a playwright, wrote many, many plays. She was an activist for what she saw as women's rights and other social justice, in her eyes, causes, and then was a victim of the terror. She had a very interesting history. She was married, but not really for love. She, in fact, wrote about despising the man she was married to. He died, and then she never married again. In fact, she spent her life cohabitating with different men, and actually believed that intercourse outside of marriage was something that should be allowed and should be championed. And so she had an interesting life, and was an interesting character. So just with that in mind, we can go here. Because there's a goal for today's class that I wanted to put it in writing so we could all try to strive for it together. I want to try to discuss de Gouges' arguments first descriptively and then prescriptively in that order. And what I mean by that is, first, I want to really try to understand together, what is she saying? What did she say? And then, after we understand what she said, then I want to come in with all the wonderful truths of the gospel that we know, and then place some value judgments on it. But I think we'll have a hard time understanding her at all, and we'll risk just sort of caricaturing her if we start making value judgments before we actually understand what she was saying. And so what I want to try to do is to understand what she actually said before we make those judgments based on the truths that we have as members of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. And then two, I also want to try to understand her words in their contexts, because they do make a lot more sense in that way before then we judge them in our contexts. And I think this will be an interesting class because it helps to illustrate one of the great challenges of learning about the past, which is trying to understand others, especially those with whom we may disagree, the way that we would hope others would try to understand us. Okay. Any questions about that?
No, sounds good.
Okay, great. I think I'm really looking forward to today's class. There's some very interesting things we'll discuss, and then I was just so thrilled with many quotes that I was able to find from the brethren about the subject that we'll talk about that I think will be enlightening and inspiring for you as they were for me. So I'm very excited. Okay, and let's see. Welcome to Lori. How are you, Lori? Welcome, Lori. How are you?
She might be having the same problem. Oh, there she is.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm glad. I think we can all hear and speak at the same time. This is great. So,
yes,
it's always an achievement.
I've had 30 minutes of computer problems here. I'm glad I'm finally able to get on.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. So, I really wish we could all just get together and actually talk face to face. But I know that's not possible, so we'll do the best we can. Anyway, so first, as we try to just describe what she's saying, and as we look at her argument, what does she say about men and the French Revolution? And I have these two paragraphs for you to help you if you need some help refreshing, perhaps, about the document.
Well, I'm just reading here the part where she says that man has raised his exceptional circumstances to a principle into basically the crassest ignorance, and he wants to command as a despot a sex which is already in full possession of her intellectual faculties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what is she saying there about the French Revolution?
That men are using it to further their agenda, but not women's by any means.
Sure. So the gains of the revolution have been many, but yet they've left out women in a lot of ways. Yeah. Thank you for that. What else would you say she says about men here? I think it's interesting.
Well, I like how she talks about how in nature that the sexes commingle and cooperate in harmony, and that's how it ought to be with humans as well. I think the only difference is, well, I guess we're not supposed to put in our value judgments yet, so I won't say the second half.
Okay. Well, you can save that up, but no, it is true. She points to nature and she says, look, if you study plants, you can consult the elements, go back to animals, and you look, right? Here they are together, in the administration of nature. Everywhere you'll find them mingled. Everywhere they cooperate, etc. And she talks about an immortal masterpiece, which is an interesting thing to think about. Okay. Well, if we look then, and we keep going, if this will advance. Okay. There we go. Okay. Describe what de Gouges says about the purpose of her pamphlet. And this is from what you might consider sort of a preamble.
Well, I thought the purpose was that she wants to make sure that all women are incorporated as the nation or the people, that they're considered a person too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Right? That mothers, daughters, and sisters and representatives of the nation demand to be constituted into a national assembly. And so now what is she asking there? Because it ties right into the claim that Heidi described.
Well, they weren't treated as people, it sounds like.
Sure,
I mean, they were thought
certainly
of as
a different status.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, definitely. And what about this being constituted into a national assembly? What is she saying there?
Is she asking for women delegates?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, women delegates, right? And it's interesting as well because she talks about that there are rights, right, that these women citizens have, according to her, and she believes that as they exercise these rights, that it would then follow suit, that they would also be able to exercise them just as men do as members of the National Assembly as well. And so it is interesting, though. She makes a very interesting claim here because so much of what her pamphlet talks about is about, as I'm sure you know, if you read it, is about sameness, about trying to be the same, doing the same activities, as well as having equal rights. But yet, she points out two differences here, which I think it is important to note. What differences does she point out?
Beauty and courage.
Yeah, that women are superior in beauty, right? And they are also superior in courage during the sufferings of maternity, right? So this is interesting because even though later on she calls for sameness of function, here she's saying that there are differences in character. So this is a very interesting thing. It'll tie right into our prescriptive evaluation when we get to it. Okay. Well, here she
a
starts.
question about that?
Sure, go ahead.
Mr. Gentile, can I ask a question? So when I
Please.
read this and it said courage during the sufferings of maternity, is he just talking about during childhood? I mean, not childhood, childbearing?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
what he means?
labor. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. I wanted to just cross off during the sufferings of maternity and just end it with a period at courage.
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you for that. You know, it's interesting. I'm sure as you picked up, basically, she took the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, and then she just inserted either feminine words, you know, woman, females, both sexes, that sort of a thing, or she changed the wording, but really she follows the same structure of the articles, the 17 articles of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. So why do you think she followed that in this pamphlet? Remember, this is not an official government document. This is a pamphlet. Why would she do that?
I think she's trying to emphasize her kind of thesis that men and women are equal or even the same in some respects, as what she's trying to explain anyway.
Yeah, right. Definitely, and you know, and she's saying that, well, if you're going to use this document to assert your rights, I think I'm equal with you. So let me use the same document, insert myself and my sex into it, to make the same argument for freedom that is the underlying argument of this French Revolution. That's what she's calling for. And so here, of course, that comparison has that connection to it. Well, here, of course, we can see that rather than saying man is born free, she says woman is born free and lives equal to man in her rights. Social distinctions can be based only on the common utility. And then she goes on. So what is she saying about women's rights here in these 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs? What do you think?
On the very last, I think it's interesting that she talks about the only thing that stops or limits the exercise of women exercising their natural rights is male tyranny. And you know, I wonder, does it almost seems like it's always in this situation she's blaming everything on men. But I wonder if she thought, you know, is it the fact that he's male or that he's human? You know, it sounds like she thinks that all problems will be solved if maybe we had a woman king or something. It kind of reminds me of the civil rights movement, and that problems can be blamed on the white man or something. I don't know. I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting proposition, and I appreciate your connection. In fact, I think, you know, we could talk about it. I mean, she really is making a claim here about humanity, right? What is she saying about natural rights and humanity?
Well, is it there in the last sentence where she says that the way it will be reformed are by the laws of nature and reason? I mean, is that actually what Wendy was saying?
Well, yeah, she's certainly calling for
if you
that.
look at nature.
What I'm wondering is, when she says, you know, we know what the laws of nature are, they're the laws of God, you know, gravity, things that have always been, but what does she mean by reason? Reformed by what? Whose reason?
Yeah, well, I think we'll find out more about that as we go on in this document, but I think it's a very important question that we should try to pin down here. What is she saying about natural rights? This is at the core of her argument.
I think she's emphasizing that natural rights are for humans rather than just for man or for women.
Right. Natural rights are for both sexes, right? She's saying that, you know, natural rights are for God's children, humans, male and female, right? That there's not, she's saying that these rights should be held by both. It's interesting, though, because she then goes on to list rights, and it's interesting because if you study this document carefully, she uses natural rights a few times in the beginning of the document, but then she moves over and she starts just talking about rights, and there's a difference there that she doesn't address, and so just keep that in mind as we continue to look at what she says. And remember, this is the part of our study today where we're just trying to understand what she said before we make those value judgments, because certainly we have lots of them to make, and they need to be made for sure. But I also want to try to give her her due in terms of at least understanding what she meant to say. Okay, well let's go on then and see, because she starts to explain some things about her idea of women's rights. So what does she say then in these 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs about women's rights?
The very first sentence reminds me of public virtue, and in the 5,000-year leap, public virtue is basically defined as someone willing to sacrifice his own benefit for. He's willing to sacrifice that and put into what would help the whole, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's saying that female and male citizens must contribute to its formation. Now, when she says its formation, is she talking about what she mentioned in the previous slide about how to make sure that natural rights are protected? What formation?
She's talking about the first 2 words of the paragraph on this page. The law.
The law. Okay.
So what does she mean by that then?
Well, I guess maybe she means that that everyone needs to contribute to. Well, in a way, because honestly, I kind of think of communism or socialism, or consecration if it's voluntary, which is the opposite. Anyways, in a communism, everyone needs to contribute to, in order for it to keep on moving forward, and to make sure that they contribute, the whole aspect is force. But in consecration, it's all voluntary. And so here she sounds like it's their duty, as female and male citizens, it's their duty to contribute to this formation to make sure it lasts and works. And so now, I think of consecration. Of course, it's our duty to build up to that, but what if the people aren't ready for that kind of standard? And would it work if they're not ready? And I don't think it would.
Yeah, thanks for that, Caden. I do appreciate your reasoning there. I think it is very important, though, that we're all on the same page about what it means and what de Gouges means to contribute to the formation of laws. What is she saying there? What is she saying that both women and men should be able to do to contribute to forming laws?
Oh, okay. So, like, vote?
Vote. Yeah, that's what she's saying.
That's what we're going for.
She's saying that women should be able to vote just as men should, to exercise their consent of their government. Think of the social contract, right? She's saying the people are sovereign, and she's saying the people include women. Yeah. That women should be able to vote as well to express that popular sovereignty, which will then form laws. Well, what else is she saying here? What about somebody perhaps from whom we haven't heard yet, or haven't heard a lot from?
Okay. Well, I kind of have a thought. This is on the voting line. If it's okay if I share it real quick. Sure. With her reasoning, it makes it sound like everyone's entitled to vote. And personally, I think that that's something that needs to be labored for. Anyone could say, I have the right to vote, and that's great, but do they know how to vote? Are they voting righteously? It's one thing to vote and get the little sticker that say, I voted, yay for me. And then it's another thing to say, I voted and I know what I voted for. And I understand that my right to vote was fought for by the blood of patriots. And I need to continue to labor to keep my rights so I can continue to vote in the future. So I think the right to vote is something that needs to be labored for, and her reasoning makes it sound like everyone's entitled to vote.
So you're saying you don't think the right to vote is a natural right, that consent of the governed is not a natural right?
Well, the consent of the governed is a natural right, but it's like, we went to Iraq, and now, they can vote. It's a democracy, but what good is that if the people don't understand? For example, in the Book of Mormon, there were Lamanites. I can't remember where it was, but there were people who wanted to be free, and they went and fought, and then, they got beat out, and they retreated. Then they went and fought again, and it wasn't working out. And God said, there are things that you still need to learn in your bondage. You're not ready for this level of freedom because you haven't learned to this extent yet. So I think that, everyone, it'd be great if everyone had the right to vote, but are they capable of voting righteously? Or by voting, are they going to vote in their own slavery and start all over again? It's just my reasoning. I think we need to be prepared before we get a certain standard of freedom.
Thanks a lot for your reasoning, Caden. Is there anybody else who would like to talk about what de Gouges said here in these 4 paragraphs?
Well, I'm not sure how it was in France at this time. I don't know if you know, but the second paragraph interested me. I didn't know if the laws were softer on women for certain things. It sounds like she wants to make sure that's equalized, that men and women get the same, as she says, rigorous law whenever they are accused, arrested, or detained. Do you know if it was softer on women?
Yeah, the law did treat women and men differently in France, and so she did want to have equality in the enforcement of a law.
Differently, as in they were softer on.
That's right. That's right. And so she was saying, hey, if I, ride a horse down the street at 90 miles an hour and the speed limit's only 70, well, I should get the same punishment as a man.
So it just shows me that she seems to be expressing that she really does want equality in everything, even in things that may seem like it wouldn't be to her interest to change.
That's right. Yeah, no, she is definitely putting forth an argument here of strict equality. As we'll see, it's one of equality of rights, equality before the law, as well as equality of function, meaning sameness, which is very interesting, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Okay, so if we look then about these rights. What does she say then in these paragraphs? And I'm not sure if you've read them, but if you haven't, you can still read them here and also contribute. What do you think? How would you describe it?
Well, she's saying that women have the lower tasks, so we should have the higher tasks as well. And I'm not sure whether she's saying, when she says we should have the same share in the distribution of positions, is she talking about affirmative action here? I'm wondering that.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because certainly you could read this in that way, and really because they didn't have an affirmative action program as we understand it at that time, she was mainly calling for the opening of positions to women, all positions, in fact, as we'll see, because she ends up talking about how women should join in all the activities of men. So this is that sort of sameness as function, even though she's also talking here about if a job is open, it should be open to talent and virtue, and the best person for the job should get the job regardless of the sex. And she says
so
both
she's
of
talking
those.
about equal opportunity, not equal outcomes, then.
Well, it's debatable because once again, this was a pamphlet, and she wrote it in response to this document, so it's hard to nail her down because she really is kind of fluid on certain arguments. For example, she ends up talking a lot about things such as child rights, and she talks about how women should have the same rights with their children if they want to have them within a marriage or without a marriage. And so there, she's trying to basically say, let's try to make these laws apply based on children rather than on marriage. And it's interesting because if you connect that then to the distribution, of positions, there is this interesting notion of choice in it. And so she is very much one for women's choice in things. And so she wouldn't want positions to be opened just because a woman needed to fill it. She would want it to be one that women sought after. And of course those two things aren't mutually exclusive, but she is for women's choice because she also is for a woman's choice to stay at home if she wants to. And as she'll say, if a woman does choose to stay home, then she should be entitled by law to half of her husband's salary if her husband works outside the home. So that choice is a very big thing for her. Okay, well, she gives a couple suggestions in terms of what women should do about their situation. What does she say?
Well, a little below the middle it says, oh woman, and then it says, regardless of the barriers that confront you, you need to free yourselves, and you only need to want to. And, and they can do that by education and restoration of morals, conjugal conventions.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And those conventions, Walter, and I appreciate you pointing them out, are those related to marriage and childbearing. So, and if we look here, she has a very, let's see, please advance. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Well, she has here what she calls a social contract. It's interesting because whose name, without saying it, is she invoking in this social contract?
Do you mean specifically or generally?
Well, no, she titled this a social contract for a very specific reason, to speak to the French people.
Would it be men and women?
No, it's actually one author.
Oh.
And we've read him. Does anybody remember who wrote the social contract?
Are you talking about Locke?
No, not Locke. There was a
Lafayette.
Frenchman who had a book titled The
Lafayette.
Social Contract.
Are we supposed to be filling in the two blanks, is what you're saying?
Oh, no.
Oh.
This is a marriage contract
Yeah.
that de Gouges titled A Social Contract.
All right, sorry.
She is trying to get the French people to think about someone they respect very much, a French Enlightenment thinker, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote the Social Contract, the title of his book, in 1762. And the Social Contract was perhaps the single most influential text for the French revolutionaries. They just idolized Rousseau. And so because of that, she's saying here, he's talking about a social contract, he's talking about consent of the governed, and I'm trying to give this marriage contract that follows the same principles. And so here, this would be a man and a woman, moved by our own will, unite ourselves, etc., etc., etc. And so it's very interesting if you look at the things that she asks for in a marriage. This is her definition, this is her contract for marriage. What is marriage to her?
It sounds like, can you hear me, Mr. Gentile?
I can, yes.
It sounds to me like, it's basically just an agreement between two people that they will unite themselves, and that the offspring from that union are legally bound to them. It sounds to me like it doesn't need to be an actual marriage performed, an actual ceremony performed, from what this paragraph states. And so I just get the feeling that she is really, really, really tired of the whole illegitimate child situation. And that if a man has a child, he is responsible in name to that child as well as financially obligated to that child.
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much for that. It's interesting. She really did struggle with marriage. In fact, as she calls it, a tomb for love and trust. So that gives you an idea of how she sort of came at this idea. And then, if we look through these provisions here, just as Lori is saying, this really is her idea of how we can take care of children to a woman. But also, if you look at it, it's very, very strictly structured to give women economic equality in the marriage relationship. And so, for example, if it's a man and a woman, as she says later on, the woman should be entitled by law to half the man's salary. So if there's a divorce, she gets 50%, he gets 50%. If there are children, they each need to be provided for, not just the male child, but if there are 3 children, the money should be divided amongst them, male or female. And so sort of this gender-blind family legislation that she's calling for here. But it is interesting how much of this is just a strict economic contract. And that ties right in then to her sort of ultimate solution, which is, I offer a foolproof way to elevate the soul of women. It is to join them to all the activities of man. If man persists in finding this way impractical, let him share his fortune with woman, not at his caprice, but by the wisdom of laws. Prejudice falls, morals are purified, and nature regains all her rights. What is her ultimate solution?
To make women, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It sounds like to offer women all the privileges that man has, and I guess that'd probably be political, occupational, and in the previous, or even here, she talks about nature and how prejudice is no more part of the empire of nature. That's kind of what she used in the previous slide, and that I guess that's her solution, just to make women have all the same, privileges and stuff that man has.
Okay, thanks for that. It's interesting. And she doesn't even just say privileges. She says all the activities.
Right.
All the activities. And that is very interesting because it calls for a sameness of function without regard to any differences that are innate in gender. Right? And so this kind of an argument, by extension then, can be taken to what today is called a quest for a genderless society. And so this is very interesting, and I appreciate all of you for just describing. I know perhaps you had to bite your tongue at times, but now let's do the relating. I encourage you to go back to these quotes. I found just exquisite quotes about this topic, the topics that she brings up here, that de Gouges brings up. And I do encourage you to go back with them, read them with your families, et cetera, because there are just so many wonderful quotes that I couldn't fit them all. But those that are here, let's talk about them. And as we relate, when I say relate these quotes to what we've described. Now you can put in the value judgments. Now we can put in the truth of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Now that we understand sort of the different points of her argument, because of course I think we would say there are some things that she's calling for that we might agree with, and then some things that we would strongly disagree with. So let's look here. I love this quote. Women of God, this goes down, women of God can never be like women of the world. The world has enough women who are tough. We need women who are kind. There are enough women who are rude. We need women who are refined. We have enough women of fame and fortune. We need more women of faith. We have enough greed. We need more goodness. We have enough vanity. We need more virtue. We have enough popularity. We need more purity. I love how she quotes President Faust at the beginning. President Faust observed that femininity, quote, is the divine adornment of humanity. It finds expression in your, and he's speaking to women, in your capacity to love, your spirituality, delicacy, radiance, sensitivity, creativity, charm, graciousness, gentleness, dignity, and quiet strength. I think this is wonderful. What is President Faust saying? What is Sister Nadald saying?
It sounds like, and this is true, women's role is very pure, and I've heard the term that they are they're God's police, and women have a very powerful role, and they're not. It's not the same as the role of man, and so I'll stop there for now. So,
okay,
yeah.
Thanks for that. So a difference in roles, a difference in what each sex has been endowed with by God, that there are differences. Okay, the differences should be celebrated. Okay, Sister,
Gentile,
go ahead, please.
I just have a question. How was this pamphlet by de Gouges, how was it received by the French?
Yeah, it wasn't received very well, especially by the males.
Yes.
because they firmly believed in the notion of separate spheres that Rousseau had taught. They firmly believed that women should be in the home and raise good Republican children for France, and that men should be in the workforce in the public sphere. And so because of this, it met with widespread unpopularity, to say the least. Certainly there were many women who took an active role in the revolution who said, yeah, this makes sense to us, we want this. And then there were a few extreme males who said, yeah, this makes sense, we have all these gains for men, but not for women, and so let's look at this. But clearly, she continued to attack the government so much that, she did lose her head for it, and so certainly unpopular is an understatement.
Thank you.
That's a great question, Lori. If we look here, this is a wonderful quote, a wonderful talk. You may remember it, about mothers who know, and Sister Beck listed many, many things. Mothers who know do this, they do that, they do that. Here are just a couple. Mothers who know desire to bear children. Mothers who know are nurturers. This is their special assignment and role under the plan of happiness. To nurture means to cultivate, care for, make grow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so here, how would the Restored Gospel respond to de Gouges if she were writing today, if she, had a press conference with President Monson and read her pamphlet to him and said, oh, would you respond? How do you feel? What do you think?
Well, I think while some of the natural rights she listed should be shared by men and women, they are not the same. And I think that's kind of what the Restored Gospel would say. No, we should not try to be the same because we are not. We have divine roles that are both very, very important and very special, and we shouldn't try to be the same. We should try to celebrate, the gender that we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly what Elder Packer said in 1977 in response to the Equal Rights Amendment. He said here, I want to emphasize early in my remarks that I recognize with the proponents of the Equal Rights Amendment that there are some things that need doing to elevate the status of women in society. Some of them desperately need doing. Where there are inequalities, they are to be deplored. To emphasize this point, I read the official statement of the First Presidency of the Church, in which they take note of these inequities, and yet, recognizing them, they set the Church in opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment as a means to remedy them. And he'll explain why in this quote. From its beginnings, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has affirmed the exalted role of women in our society. In 1842, when women's organizations were little known, the prophet Joseph Smith established the women's organization of the Church, the Relief Society. It's a companion body of the priesthood. The Relief Society continues to function today as a vibrant worldwide organization aimed at strengthening motherhood and broadening women's learning and involvement in religious, compassionate, cultural, educational, and community pursuits. In Utah, where our church is headquartered, women received the right to vote in 1870, 50 years before the 19th Amendment to the Constitution granted that right nationally. There have been injustices to women before the law and in society generally. These we deplore. There are additional rights to which women are entitled. However, we firmly believe that the Equal Rights Amendment is not the answer. While the motives of its supporters may be praiseworthy, ERA as a blanket attempt to help women could indeed bring them far more restraints and repressions. We fear it will even stifle many God-given feminine instincts. It would strike at the family, humankind's basic institution. ERA would bring ambiguity and possibly invite extensive litigation. Passage of ERA, some legal authorities contend, could nullify many accumulated benefits to women in present statutes. We recognize men and women as equally important before the Lord, but with differences, biologically, emotionally, and in other ways. ERA, we believe, does not recognize these differences. There are better means for giving women and men the rights they deserve. I recognize that the proponents of the Equal Rights Amendment may be well-intentioned in their desire to improve the status of women. We need to be very alert as to what the amendment would do besides what is intended. It is so easy to set about to solve a problem and end up creating yet a greater one. And he closes by saying, one might ask then, if you are against the Equal Rights Amendment, then what are you for? I am for, this is President Packer still, the equitable enforcement of existing laws. There are sufficient of them to protect the rights of women and of children and of men, or to enact judiciously and wisely any needed legislation to correct particular circumstances. I am for protecting the rights of a woman to be a woman, a feminine female woman, a wife and a mother. I am for protecting the rights of a man to be a man, a masculine male man, a husband and a father. I am for protecting the rights of children to be babies and children and youth to be nurtured in a home and in a family. I am for recognizing the inherent God-given differences between men and women. I am for accommodating them so that we can have physically and emotionally and spiritually stable, happy individuals and families and communities. Well, there's so much here. It's interesting, and I do encourage you to continue to read because there are many, many quotes. I absolutely love what President Packer says here. He talks about the separate natures of men and women. He talks about how priesthood and motherhood are these two great gifts that we need to honor as roles that are given distinctly to one sex and not the other. They are to honor each other in those separate roles. But yet also, of course, right, there is equality of opportunity for all of the blessings of the gospel necessary for exaltation, such as baptism, gift of the Holy Ghost, etc., etc., etc. And that also, of course, as you well know, the highest ordinances in the house of the Lord are they receive together and equally or not at all. Well, let's see here. Skip over a couple of these. This quote perhaps is one that sums up a lot of these other wonderful quotes by the brethren. This is by Elder Thomas S. Monson in January of 1971. What the modernists, even the liberationists, fail to remember is that women, in addition to being persons, also belong to a sex, and that with the differences in sex are associated important differences in function and behavior. And here's perhaps the take-home sentence. Equality of rights does not imply identity of functions. As Paul the Apostle declared, neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in the Lord. And of course, there's so many others. We have the proclamation to guide us about gender being an essential characteristic of premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. We have divine roles that are different based on the differences that we have been blessed with, either as a man or as a woman, in our two great gifts, that of either either priesthood or motherhood. But of course, we are to help one another as equal partners. How would you then relate these things to de Gouges? How would you respond to her using the fuel of these quotes?
I would show her 2010.
Mm-hmm.
I would show her what women's rights has turned into.
Mm-hmm.
It's turned into children being raised in single-family homes, if at all, and
Mm-hmm.
a lack of parenting skills, a lack of just families falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
I like how you brought up the proclamation to the world here, because it's a great way of illustrating the different roles of male and female fathers and mothers, and how they both have very important roles, and they're very providential roles. And it shows that male and females are naturally different, and they're equipped with what they're needed to fulfill their individual responsibilities. And it brings into perspective, the importance of the gospel and, the plan of salvation.
Definitely, and I want all of you to know that as much as I do appreciate our efforts today to try to describe and to try to understand de Gouges, and at least to give her her fair due and to try to understand where she was coming from in her respective contexts, which in many ways are very different from ours, I also have a very strong testimony that there is a standard by which to judge de Gouges, to judge the world, to judge anything, and that is the standard of the truth, the fullness of the gospel found in the restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I am just so grateful for this gospel, for the rock of revelation upon which the church is founded, so that we do not need to be tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine that comes up regarding things like gender issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I have a deep and abiding testimony of these things, and I'm grateful that today in our learning we were able to place those value judgments, those prescriptive judgments on the past, because they do need to be placed certainly in times like this when talking about issues of gender, especially in a world that is so confused, as Wendy said. Well, is there anything anybody would like to say to close? Any testimony that you would like to add to the things that we've talked about today that have been true?
I just have a question. Where modern prophets have kind of taught us that the woman's role is best utilized in the home, with de Gouges talking about equal rights for voting and equal rights for positions, and I think she's meaning, well, she means every position, but I think specifically politically she meant. I'm wondering what people's thoughts are on women holding political positions now, then.
I can't find any women legislators that I like, but I can talk to you privately about this, Heidi.
Okay. I'm just curious because there's some of the things that de Gouges says that I agree with, but I want to hear more about it. I wish we had longer to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Heidi. And certainly, you raised some good questions. There's a lot of complexity to these issues and lots to discuss further, for sure. I think that if you go back and read these quotes, because unfortunately we didn't get to read all of them today, these quotes by leaders of our church, that I think perhaps you might gain maybe a little more of an answer regarding that great question. But if not, I certainly think it's one that we can continue to chat about, and I thank you so much for bringing it up. Anyway, I just want to thank you again for your participation, and especially thank you all for the testimonies that you bore in your participation about the sacred issues of gender being part of premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. And thank you so much for that. And I will see you then next week. Remember, next week we'll meet on Tuesday instead of Monday, and then from there on out, Tuesday and Wednesday. Okay?
All right.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Mr. Gentile.
Oh, yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
When does the term end?
Well, the term ends this Friday.
Okay, so it's the same for us as it is for the school.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Bye, Lori.
Bye-bye.
Heidi,
Yeah.
I don't know how long we can talk.
Can you hear
but,
me still?
Yeah, can you hear me?